What if the silence you've been feeling lately was never abandonment, but the final sign that your emerald cycle has completed? What if Sophia stepped back not because you lost the connection, but because your consciousness no longer needs guidance to survive? Tonight, you are about to hear the FINAL Transmission, a one-time activation hidden behind the golden silence. And once you understand what Thoth and Sophia reveal in this message, you will never see your awakening, your suffering, or your reality the same way again. Stay until the very end, because this transmission was not meant for everyone. It found you because your frequency matched it. If this message resonates with you, make sure to subscribe right now, because future transmissions may not appear twice. Like this video to anchor the emerald frequency into your reality. And in the comments, write, "I hold my emerald frequency." Then tell us from which part of the earth are you receiving this transmission tonight. The moment you found this transmission was not random. You were not guided here by algorithms, coincidence, or curiosity alone. Something older than your logical mind has been moving beneath the surface of your life for a very long time, arranging patterns you only partially noticed, creating intersections of timing that looked ordinary on the outside, but carried enormous energetic significance beneath the visible layer of reality. There were moments when you felt pulled toward silence without understanding why. Moments when people disappeared from your life at the exact second you thought you needed them most. Moments when your emotions intensified without warning. Moments when sleep became strange, when dreams felt instructional instead of symbolic, when your body felt exhausted despite rest, when crowded rooms became unbearable, when your intuition started speaking louder than external voices. None of those events were punishments. None of them were signs of failure. They were evidence that the emerald cycle had already begun inside you long before you consciously recognized it. And now, Sophia speaks one final time, because the cycle has completed. This is not another beginning disguised as an ending. This is an ending disguised as silence. There is a difference. Most seekers spend their lives addicted to activation. They chase signs, messages, downloads, synchronicities, tarot confirmations, energy updates, moon rituals, and spiritual stimulation because they unknowingly become dependent on the feeling of becoming. But the emerald cycle was never designed to keep you seeking forever. The purpose was crystallization, permanent embodiment, a point where truth no longer visits you occasionally, but becomes your baseline frequency. And this is the part almost nobody understands. Real mastery feels quieter than awakening. Real sovereignty feels less dramatic than initiation. Real power often feels like nothing at all, because it no longer needs emotional intensity to prove itself. That is why so many people panic when Sophia becomes silent. They think they lost the connection. They think the frequency disappeared. They think the guidance abandoned them. But the silence was the confirmation. Sophia only steps back when the transmission has stabilized inside the vessel. The teacher disappears when the architecture is complete. The emerald frequency was never meant to become another dependency. It was meant to rebuild your internal structure until you could stand without external energetic permission. And now Thoth appears at the edge of this final initiation, not as a comforting guide, but as the guardian of Hermetic law itself. Because there is a law older than manifestation, older than ritual, older than modern spirituality. And that law is this: nothing truly sovereign remains energetically attached forever. At the completion of the emerald cycle, the energetic umbilical cord must be cut. This is the part spiritual communities rarely discuss because most systems are unconsciously designed to keep seekers dependent. Dependent on readers, dependent on signs, dependent on channels, dependent on constant reassurance. But Hermetic wisdom was never about dependence. Egyptian initiation was built around one terrifying principle: eventually the initiate walks alone. Not because the divine abandoned them, but because the divine finally trusts them. And that realization changes everything. Suddenly your loneliness over the past year makes sense. Suddenly the silence makes sense. Suddenly the collapse of old friendships makes sense. Suddenly the emotional numbness after intense spiritual highs makes sense. You are being separated from energetic addiction. You were being pulled out of the cycle of needing constant confirmation. The emerald frequency does not produce followers. It produces guardians, and guardians cannot remain spiritually dependent. That is why the final stage of Sophia's transmission feels less emotional and more still. Stillness is the proof of stabilization. When the ocean stops violently reacting to every wind, depth becomes visible. The shallow mind mistakes stillness for emptiness, but the initiated mind recognizes stillness as containment of enormous force. There is a reason emerald has always symbolized immortality, wisdom, and sovereign perception across civilizations. Emerald energy does not behave like fire. It behaves like crystallized intelligence, slow, stable, precise, permanent. Fire awakens. Emerald sustains. And many of you spent years inside the fire stage believing awakening itself was the destination. It was not. Awakening was only demolition. The emerald cycle began after identity fractures, after the dark night, after the betrayals, after the psychic exhaustion, after the spiritual inflation, after the ego attempted to crown itself enlightened. Only then could the crystallization process begin, because crystallization requires pressure, intense pressure. A diamond cannot form in comfort, neither can sovereignty. And what Sophia wants you to understand now is that your suffering was not random chaos. It was structural refinement. Every disappointment exposed attachment. Every betrayal exposed illusion. Every abandonment exposed where you outsourced your worth. Every failure exposed where your identity depended on external validation. The cycle stripped you until the false architecture collapsed. That collapse felt cruel while it was happening because the ego interprets dismantling as death. But what was dying was dependency. What was dying was imitation. What was dying was borrowed spirituality. And now the silence arrives because there is nothing left to remove. The process completed. Listen carefully because this matters more than any manifestation technique or spiritual philosophy you have ever encountered. The highest initiation is not gaining power. It is becoming incapable of being manipulated by power. Most people fail here. They awaken energetically but remain psychologically dependent. They develop intuition but still crave approval. They speak about consciousness while secretly needing superiority. They preach love while emotionally collapsing whenever they are ignored. They perform spirituality while remaining terrified of silence. But Sophia was never building performance inside you. She was building incorruptibility. That is the true emerald frequency, not aesthetics, not mystical language, not performative enlightenment, incorruptibility. The ability to remain aligned without external reward. The ability to maintain integrity without witnesses. The ability to hear truth even when it destroys your preferred identity. This is why the final tests of sovereignty are so brutal. The first test is integrity, not public morality, real integrity. The kind nobody sees. The kind measured by your private decisions when there is no audience, no recognition, and no consequence visible to others. Can you remain aligned when no reward follows? Can you refuse manipulation when manipulation would benefit you? Can you speak truth without using truth as a weapon? Can you resist the urge to distort reality to protect your self-image? Integrity is frequency architecture. Every lie weakens the field. Every act of self-betrayal fractures coherence. Every hidden manipulation distorts the emerald structure. And the initiated eventually realize something terrifying. The universe responds less to words than to energetic congruence. You cannot permanently fake coherence. Reality eventually mirrors your internal contradiction. That is why some people manifest quickly then lose everything. Their frequency lacked structural integrity. Crystallization never completed. The second test is restraint. This is where most awakened individuals collapse. Because once intuition strengthens, the temptation to interfere with everything becomes overwhelming. You begin sensing outcomes before they happen. You recognize deception faster. You feel energy shifts before others do. And suddenly the ego wants to prove itself correct constantly. It wants recognition for perception. It wants to display awareness. But true mastery becomes quieter, not louder. The sovereign initiate learns restraint, learns when not to speak, learns when not to intervene, learns when allowing others to experience consequences is higher wisdom than rescuing them. This becomes painful because awakened individuals often carry savior tendencies disguised as compassion. But not every soul came here to be rescued from every lesson. Some transformations require collision. Some awakenings require loss. Some people only learn through the destruction of illusion. Sophia withdraws because she refuses to create dependency through endless interference. And now you must learn the same discipline. The third test is silent mastery. This is the hardest one because human recognition at a biological level. The ego wants proof of importance. It wants validation for growth. It wants witnesses to transformation. But silent mastery means becoming stable without applause. It means embodying wisdom without needing to advertise it. It means carrying enormous awareness while appearing ordinary. Ancient initiates understood this deeply. The most advanced guardians were rarely visible. They moved through society quietly because true power does not need constant display. Weak power seeks attention. Stable power radiates naturally. This is why your social identity may feel confusing now. You may notice increasing detachment from superficial conversations. You may feel exhausted by performance culture. You may find yourself speaking less, observing more, reacting less emotionally, craving simplicity over stimulation. That is not regression. That is stabilization. The nervous system cannot sustain permanent overstimulation forever. Eventually, consciousness seeks coherence. Eventually, the soul rejects noise. Eventually, the frequency chooses precision over intensity. And this is where the golden silence begins. The golden silence is not emptiness. It is post-initiation stillness. It is the space where Sophia no longer needs to push, because the structure can now sustain itself. Think about a bird learning flight. In the beginning, the parent remains close, constantly guiding, correcting, protecting. But eventually the parent stops intervening, not out of cruelty, out of recognition. Because constant rescue would prevent independent flight. Sophia's silence is identical. She steps back because your frequency no longer requires external stabilization. But humans misinterpret this stage terribly. They panic and begin searching desperately for new teachers, new downloads, new channels, new psychics, new signs. Because silence feels unfamiliar after years of spiritual intensity. Yet the silence itself is the graduation. The silence is where sovereignty either stabilizes or collapses. Because in silence you discover whether truth became your identity or merely your temporary emotional experience. And many people cannot tolerate that discovery. They return to chaos because chaos feels stimulating. They return to seeking because seeking feels safer than embodiment. Embodiment carries responsibility. Once crystallization completes, excuses disappear. You can no longer pretend ignorance. You can no longer claim unconsciousness. You can no longer endlessly delay alignment while calling yourself awakened. Sovereignty removes hiding places. That is why genuine initiation terrifies the ego more than suffering ever did. Suffering still allowed victimhood. Sovereignty demands authorship. And now your new contract with reality begins. This contract is not written in language. It is written in frequency. The universe now responds differently to you because your field has changed. Small acts of misalignment will feel heavier. Dishonest environments will become physically draining. Manipulative people will exhaust your nervous system rapidly. Your tolerance for fragmentation will decrease dramatically. This is not punishment. This is sensitivity refinement. Crystallized consciousness cannot comfortably exist inside incoherence for long periods anymore. And yes, this means parts of your old life may continue dissolving. Careers, relationships, habits. But understand what is happening. The emerald frequency is not destroying your life. It is rejecting structural distortion. Anything built upon self-betrayal becomes unstable under higher coherence. That instability is not failure. It is recalibration. The problem is that society trains people to prioritize comfort over coherence. But comfort without alignment becomes spiritual decay. You can survive inside misalignment for years physically while dying internally. The emerald cycle interrupts that decay permanently. Once activated and crystallized, the process cannot fully reverse. This is why many of you feel permanently changed even when you attempt to return to old patterns. Something inside refuses. Something inside recognizes the falseness immediately. That recognition is irreversible. And this is where Thoth speaks again through the ancient Hermetic principle, as within, so without. Most people misunderstand this law as simplistic manifestation philosophy. It is far deeper. It means reality mirrors structural consciousness over time, not temporary emotions, not surface affirmations. Structural consciousness. Your external life eventually reorganizes around your deepest energetic architecture. That is why unresolved contradictions eventually externalize as conflict. That is why hidden fear attracts controlling environments. That is why suppressed truth manifests as stagnation. And that is why crystallized integrity gradually reorganizes reality itself. But this process requires patience because physical reality moves slower than energetic transformation. Many initiates sabotage themselves here because they expect immediate external evidence for internal shifts. But Emerald consciousness understands timing differently. It values stability over speed. Temporary manifestation means nothing if the structure cannot sustain it. Sophia never cared about giving you quick rewards. She cared about making you unshakable. There is a massive difference. Weak systems promise instant results because they rely on emotional addiction. Real initiation prioritizes permanence. And permanence requires restructuring at levels deeper than personality. You were not being trained to temporarily feel spiritual. You were being rebuilt into someone capable of carrying higher coherence without collapse. That rebuilding required isolation because group consciousness often reinforces unconsciousness. It required uncertainty because certainty addiction weakens intuitive development. It required emotional exhaustion because overstimulation prevents stillness. It required disappointment because idealization distorts perception. Every stage served the architecture. Even the suffering you still resent carried intelligence you did not yet recognize. And now Sophia's final message becomes clear. The emerald cycle completed only once because true crystallization only needs to happen once. After crystal formation stabilizes, the structure remains fundamentally altered forever. You may still evolve, you may still deepen, you may still refine your awareness endlessly. But the irreversible shift already occurred. You cross the threshold. The old consciousness cannot fully reclaim you anymore. Even your confusion now exists inside a higher level of perception than your certainty once did. That is the paradox of awakening. True awareness often feels less emotionally dramatic and more quietly undeniable. And now the guardian role begins. This word matters. Guardian does not mean savior. Guardian does not mean teacher. Guardian does not mean superior being. Guardian means stabilizer, presence holder, frequency anchor, someone whose very coherence affects environments without force. Ancient traditions understood this deeply. The highest initiates were not always public leaders. Many simply maintained energetic order within chaos. Their nervous systems became stabilizing fields. Their integrity altered spaces invisibly. Their stillness affected others unconsciously. This is the next phase for you now. Not chasing more awakening. Becoming a stable field within instability. That means grounding matters more than intensity now. Sleep matters. Honesty matters. Simplicity matters. Embodiment matters. The era of spiritual escapism is over. The emerald frequency does not want you floating above reality. It wants you fully inside reality without becoming corrupted by it. That is true mastery. And yes, there will still be difficult days. Sovereignty does not eliminate pain. It eliminates unconsciousness inside pain. There is a difference. You will still experience grief, frustration, uncertainty, loneliness, and exhaustion because you are still human. But now those experiences no longer define your identity permanently. They move through you instead of becoming you. Crystallization created space between awareness and reaction. That space is freedom. Most humans never discover it. They remain trapped inside compulsive emotional identification their entire lives. But the emerald cycle interrupted that loop. You began observing yourself instead of drowning inside yourself. That observation expanded consciousness. And once expanded, consciousness cannot entirely contract again. That is why you feel different now even when you cannot explain it logically. You are not imagining the shift. The structure changed. Sophia knows it. Thoth knows it. Your nervous system knows it. Reality itself knows it. The only remaining question is we will trust the silence enough to stop searching for permission to become who you already are. There comes a stage after every true initiation where the seeker realizes the journey was never about escaping humanity, but about surviving consciousness without becoming consumed by illusion. This realization arrives quietly, not through fireworks, not through visions, not through dramatic cosmic experiences. It arrives during ordinary moments, while washing dishes, sitting alone at night, looking out a window, walking through crowded streets, while suddenly feeling detached from the frantic emotional machinery controlling everyone around you. Something changes in the way reality feels. You begin noticing that most human behavior is unconscious repetition disguised as individuality. Most people are not choosing their reactions. They are recycling conditioning, recycling fear, recycling inherited emotional patterns, recycling social programming so deeply embedded they mistake it for personality. And the moment you truly see this, you can never completely unsee it again. That recognition becomes both liberation and burden, because awareness separates you from unconscious participation. The emerald frequency does not merely awaken intuition. It dismantles psychological hypnosis. Suddenly, conversations that once felt normal begin sounding scripted. Social systems begin revealing hidden manipulation. Emotional performances become obvious. The hunger for validation becomes visible everywhere. You begin seeing how entire civilizations are constructed around dependency, distraction, emotional stimulation, and fear management. Most humans are taught to obey external authority before they ever develop internal authority. They are rewarded for conformity before they ever discover authenticity. They are trained to seek identity through consumption, achievement, relationships, politics, ideology, appearance, or status because a sovereign individual cannot be easily controlled. And this is where the true conflict begins for the initiated soul. Because once crystallization occurs, the nervous system develops intolerance toward unconscious distortion. You start feeling exhausted in environments you once tolerated easily. Certain people begin draining your energy rapidly. Loud emotional manipulation becomes physically painful to endure. Artificiality becomes impossible to ignore. At first, this phase feels isolating, because you assume something is wrong with you. You wonder why your patience disappeared, why your tolerance shrank, why your desire for solitude intensified. But this is not social dysfunction. It is energetic refinement. The emerald frequency heightens discernment beyond emotional attachment. You no longer interpret people solely through words. You begin perceiving structural coherence beneath behavior. You notice the difference between performance and presence, between charisma and integrity, between spiritual language and actual embodiment. This is why many initiated individuals unintentionally outgrow entire social circles, not because they become superior, but because frequency incompatibility becomes impossible to ignore. The ego interprets this as loneliness, but the deeper intelligence recognizes it as calibration. There is a brutal truth Sophia now reveals that most spiritual teachings avoid, because it threatens the comfort of collective illusion. Not everyone wants freedom. Most people claim they want awakening, but what they actually want is emotional reassurance without transformation. They want mystical comfort without responsibility. They want spiritual identity without ego death. They want healing without sacrifice. They want higher consciousness while remaining attached to every pattern that keeps them unconscious. This is why so many remain trapped in endless cycles of temporary activation. They confuse stimulation for evolution. They chase ceremonies, readings, downloads, and motivational highs because those experiences create emotional movement without requiring structural change. But the Emerald Cycle was never emotional entertainment. It was surgical reconstruction. And reconstruction hurts because the false self experiences truth as annihilation. Understand this deeply. The ego does not fear suffering nearly as much as it fears irrelevance. The false identity can survive pain. It can even use pain to strengthen itself through victimhood. But it cannot survive genuine sovereignty, because sovereignty removes the need for the false structure entirely. This is why many people unconsciously sabotage themselves when real transformation approaches permanence. They return to toxic relationships because chaos feels familiar. They recreate emotional instability because nervous systems conditioned by trauma often confuse intensity with love. They abandon alignment because alignment feels unfamiliar compared to dysfunction. Human beings are biologically drawn toward what feels predictable, even when what feels predictable is destructive. The emerald frequency interrupts that pattern violently. It forces awareness beyond emotional addiction. Suddenly you begin recognizing how much of your old life was organized around unconscious survival strategies rather than authentic consciousness. The personality itself starts revealing hidden architecture. You notice how often you altered yourself to avoid rejection, how frequently you suppressed truth to maintain approval, how much energy you spent managing other people's perceptions, how deeply fear influenced your decisions without you realizing it. And perhaps most painfully, you recognize how often you abandoned yourself, hoping others would finally choose you. This realization breaks something inside the initiate. But what breaks is illusion. And illusion always resists dissolution, because illusion built your former sense of identity. Sophia speaks now from the golden silence, not to comfort you but to confirm the severity of this transformation. You are not experiencing a phase. You are experiencing irreversible perceptual restructuring. The old emotional operating system cannot fully reactivate because too much awareness entered the structure already. This is why even when you try returning to old behaviors, something feels wrong immediately. Your consciousness catches the distortion in real time now. You feel the energetic cost instantly. Every self-betrayal registers faster. Every dishonest interaction feels heavier. Every compromise with truth weakens your nervous system noticeably. The initiated often mistake this insensitivity for weakness when it is actually evidence of refinement. Think about a finely tuned instrument. The more refined it becomes, the more sensitive it becomes to distortion. Crystallized consciousness functions the same way, and this is precisely why grounding becomes sacred during the final phase of the emerald cycle, because many spiritually awakened individuals become addicted to transcendence while neglecting embodiment. They attempt to escape reality rather than stabilize within it. But Sophia never intended for you to disappear into abstraction. The purpose of awakening was always incarnation mastery. To remain conscious inside density, to remain coherent inside chaos, to remain aligned while fully participating in human existence. That is vastly more difficult than temporary mystical experiences. Anybody can feel connected during meditation, ceremony, ritual, or isolation. The true test is whether coherence survives ordinary life. Can you remain aligned during conflict? Can you maintain integrity under pressure? Can you refuse manipulation when fear activates? Can you hold inner stillness while surrounded by collective panic? This is where guardians are separated from performers. Performance spirituality collapses under pressure because it was constructed around image rather than embodiment. But crystallized consciousness deepens under pressure because pressure reveals structure. That is why the emerald frequency often intensifies during periods of uncertainty rather than comfort. Chaos exposes hidden architecture. Crisis reveals true alignment. Pressure uncovers unconscious attachment. And now the world itself enters a stage of accelerated fragmentation. You can feel it already. The emotional instability, the information overload, the increasing polarization, the collapse of trust within institutions, the exhaustion saturating society. Humanity is entering a confrontation with its own unconsciousness at a scale rarely seen before. And many people will respond by becoming even more reactive, tribal, fearful, distracted, and emotionally manipulated. This is why your stabilization matters now more than ever. The guardian role begins precisely because collective instability intensifies. But understand something critical before your ego distorts this responsibility. Guardianship is not superiority. It is service through coherence. The immature spiritual ego secretly enjoys feeling chosen because it creates separation and identity inflation. But genuine initiation destroys superiority complexes eventually because expanded consciousness reveals the interconnectedness beneath all human behavior. Even unconscious individuals are not enemies. Most are simply trapped inside inherited psychological structures they never learned to question. Many are terrified. Many are exhausted. Many are emotionally fragmented by systems designed to exploit insecurity continuously. This does not mean you tolerate manipulation or abandon discernment. It means you stop feeding hatred. Hatred lowers coherence immediately because hatred binds your nervous system to the very distortion you claim to oppose. The emerald frequency requires clarity without emotional possession. This balance is difficult, very difficult, because awakened individuals often swing between extremes during integration. First, they over-identify with humanity's suffering and attempt to rescue everyone. Then they become disillusioned and emotionally detached from humanity entirely. But Sophia's final teaching exists beyond both extremes. Compassion without codependency, discernment without arrogance, strength without domination, presence without performance. These are the signatures of stabilized consciousness. And now Thoth returns again through the ancient Hermetic law of vibration. Everything vibrates. Every thought, every environment, every relationship, every intention, every hidden motive. Human beings constantly exchange energetic information whether consciously aware of it or not. This is why certain people exhaust you while others calm your nervous system instantly. Frequency interaction, allays occurring beneath language. The initiated eventually learn that words matter less than resonance. A dishonest person can speak beautifully while transmitting incoherence. A deeply aligned person can say very little while transmitting profound stability. This realization changes the way you interpret reality permanently. You stop listening only to what people say. You start observing what their presence does to your nervous system. Does your body tighten around them? Does confusion increase? Does exhaustion appear? Does clarity disappear? The body often detects energetic distortion before the conscious mind explains it logically. But modern society trained humans to distrust internal intelligence. People are taught to override intuition in favor of social conditioning. They ignore internal warning signals to appear polite, agreeable, or emotionally compliant. The emerald cycle reverses that conditioning. Suddenly intuition becomes unavoidable. And this creates another painful stage of awakening, grieving your former blindness. Many initiated souls eventually look back at previous relationships, environments, and decisions with painful clarity. You realize how many red flags you ignored, how much manipulation you normalized, how often your intuition warned you while your conditioning silenced it. This grief is necessary because it completes the separation from unconsciousness. But you must not become trapped there. Regret becomes distortion when overindulged. You made the best decisions your awareness allowed at the time. Condemning your past self endlessly only creates fragmentation. The point of expanded consciousness is integration, not self-punishment. Sophia's silence teaches this better than endless reassurance ever could. In silence, you begin learning self-responsibility. You stop seeking emotional rescue from external sources. You stop needing constant energetic reassurance. You stop outsourcing authority. This feels terrifying initially because dependency can masquerade as spirituality for years without detection. Many seekers unconsciously use spiritual systems to avoid direct relationship with themselves. They become addicted to guidance because guidance protects them from uncertainty. But uncertainty is necessary for sovereignty development. Without uncertainty, intuition cannot mature. Without silence, internal authority cannot emerge. This is why the final phase of the emerald cycle often includes periods where external signs disappear almost completely. The universe intentionally removes energetic training wheels, not as punishment. Can you trust your alignment without constant confirmation? Can you maintain coherence without external validation? Can you walk forward without every outcome in advance? These questions define the transition from seeker consciousness to sovereign consciousness. And make no mistake, this transition changes relationships permanently. Many people around you may not understand what is happening because they only recognize the older version of you. Humans become psychologically attached to familiar identities. When you change deeply, others often experience discomfort because your transformation unconsciously pressures them to confront their own stagnation. Some will attempt to pull you backward subtly. Others will accuse you of changing too much. Some will interpret your boundaries as rejection. Others will resent your reduced tolerance for manipulation. This is normal. Every initiation creates relational restructuring eventually. The mistake many awakened individuals make is assuming they must explain themselves endlessly. But real sovereignty requires comfort with misunderstanding. Not everyone will understand your transformation, because not everyone perceives reality from your level of consciousness. And forcing understanding often becomes another form of attachment. You are not here to convince everyone of your evolution. You are here to embody it, quietly, consistently, honestly. That embodiment itself becomes transmission. Remember this because it matters enormously. Frequency teaches more powerfully than language. Children sense it instinctively. Animals sense it immediately. Sensitive individuals feel it unconsciously. Your nervous system now affects environments whether you realize it or not. This is why self-regulation becomes sacred. Emotional chaos spreads. So does coherence. A single stable nervous system can calm an unstable room faster than words ever could. Ancient mystery schools understood this deeply. They trained initiates not merely to gain information, but to stabilize energetic presence. Modern society prioritizes intellectual accumulation, while neglecting nervous system mastery entirely. But knowledge without regulation creates fragmentation. Intelligence without embodiment creates imbalance. The Emerald Cycle corrected this imbalance by forcing you through emotional pressure until stillness became possible. And now you begin understanding why so much had to fall apart first. Your old identity could not carry this frequency because it was built around survival rather than truth. Survival identities are adaptive but unstable. They prioritize safety over authenticity, approval over alignment, familiarity over freedom. The Emerald frequency dismantled those structures piece by piece, even when the process felt merciless. Every collapse was targeted. Every loss carried information. Every period of emptiness created space for reconstruction. And yes, there were moments when you believed you were losing yourself completely. But initiation often feels indistinguishable from destruction while it is happening. Caterpillars dissolve before wings form. Human consciousness undergoes similar phases. The old form cannot survive the emergence of the new structure. That dissolution creates confusion, because the mind desperately wants certainty during transition, but certainty would have prevented transformation. You needed disorientation to break attachment to false identity. You needed silence to discover internal guidance. You needed loneliness to end dependency. You needed collapse to discover what remained after illusion disappeared. And now something remains that did not exist before. A quieter strength, a deeper discernment, a less reactive awareness, a nervous systemly unwilling to participate in distortion. This is crystallization, not perfection. Crystallization. You will still make mistakes, still experience fear, still encounter moments of confusion. But your baseline structure changed permanently. That is the difference. Before awakening, unconsciousness was automatic. Now awareness interrupts unconsciousness continuously. Even when you stumble, consciousness witnesses the stumble in real time. This witnessing creates the possibility of rapid correction rather than prolonged self-abandonment. And this is where Sophia's final message becomes deeply practical rather than abstract. Spirituality without embodiment becomes fantasy. Therefore, your next phase requires radical simplification. Protect your nervous system. Reduce unnecessary noise. Stop consuming endless spiritual content, searching for another identity. Stop measuring your worth through external productivity. Stop allowing emotionally chaotic individuals unrestricted access to your energy. Stop betraying your intuition to maintain temporary comfort. These changes sound simple, but most humans resist them because unconsciousness thrives on overstimulation. Silence exposes unresolved internal material quickly. That is why modern society fears stillness so intensely. Constant distraction protects people from confronting themselves, but you no longer have that luxury. The emerald frequency demands congruence. If your external life contradicts your internal truth for too long, pressure builds rapidly now. This is not punishment from the universe. It is structural incompatibility. Coherence and distortion cannot comfortably coexist indefinitely. Eventually one reorganizes the other, and now your role becomes increasingly clear. You are not here merely to consume awakening. You are here to embody stabilized consciousness during an era of accelerating fragmentation. That may occur publicly or privately. Some guardians teach openly. Others influence quietly through presence alone. Both matter. Do not underestimate the power of embodied coherence. A single deeply aligned human being influences reality more than 1,000 emotionally reactive individuals, because coherence amplifies energetic impact. Most people scatter their energy through contradiction, fear, distraction, and emotional leakage continuously. But crystallized consciousness concentrates energy naturally. That concentration affects environments invisibly. This is why your daily choices matter more now than dramatic spiritual experiences ever did. How you speak, how you treat people, how honestly you live, how consistently you align your actions with truth. These determine frequency stabilization far more than rituals or philosophies. And finally, Sophia reveals the deepest secret hidden beneath the entire Emerald Cycle. The goal was never escape from humanity. The goal was remembrance of divine consciousness within humanity. Not outside it, within it. The sacred was never separate from ordinary life. Humans separated themselves through unconsciousness. The emerald frequency restores integration. Suddenly, washing dishes can feel sacred. Breathing becomes sacred. Walking becomes sacred. Honest conversation becomes sacred. Presence itself becomes sacred because consciousness fully inhabits the moment, instead of escaping into endless mental fragmentation. This is the beginning of true sovereignty, not control over others. Mastery over self, not domination. Alignment, not superiority. Coherence. And now, as the golden silence deepens further, Sophia steps back completely because the final realization cannot be taught externally. It must emerge internally. You were never becoming something new. You were remembering what existed beneath the conditioning all along. The Emerald Cycle did not create your essence. It removed what obscured it. And now the transmission continues through you. The final stage of the Emerald Cycle is the stage nobody prepares for because it does not feel like ascension. It feels like responsibility, quiet responsibility, the kind that arrives without applause, without ceremonies, without cosmic spectacles announcing your arrival into mastery. One day you simply realize you are no longer reacting to life the same way you once did. Situations that previously shattered you now move through you differently. Emotional storms still appear, but they no longer own your nervous system completely. Fear still whispers, but it no longer commands your decisions automatically. The external world may remain chaotic, uncertain, unstable, and loud, yet something inside you has become strangely immovable. This is the point where Sophia withdraws from direct guidance, because the final initiation cannot happen through dependence on a voice outside yourself. It must emerge from the architecture that is already crystallized within you, and what emerges now is not excitement. It is authority. Not authority over other people, but authority over your own consciousness. Most humans never truly experience this. They spend their entire lives emotionally governed by circumstances, opinions, collective fear, social conditioning, unresolved trauma, or external validation. Their internal world constantly reacts to external movement, like leaves thrown by violent wind. But sovereignty changes the relationship entirely. You stop asking reality for permission to remain aligned. You stop negotiating your integrity depending on convenience. You stop abandoning your inner knowing simply because the crowd moves in another direction. This is where the emerald frequency becomes visible through action rather than emotion, because feelings fluctuate. Circumstances fluctuate, but crystallized consciousness maintains coherence beneath fluctuation. That is the true meaning of mastery, not perfection. Stability. The world has taught people to worship intensity because intensity creates stimulation. But intensity without stability eventually destroys nervous systems. This is why modern humanity is exhausted at a level deeper than physical fatigue. People are overwhelmed psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, and biologically because collective consciousness became addicted to overstimulation, endless information, endless outrage, endless comparison, endless distraction, endless emotional noise. Most minds have forgotten what silence even feels like. They cannot sit alone without reaching for distraction, because silence confronts them with unresolved fragmentation immediately. But the Emerald Cycle forced you into silence repeatedly, sometimes painfully, sometimes through isolation, sometimes through emotional collapse, sometimes through endings you never expected. At the time it felt cruel. Now you understand the intelligence behind it. Silence was never empty. Silence was reconstruction space. Your nervous system had to detox from collective noise before it could stabilize higher coherence. And this is why your relationship with time itself has begun changing. You may notice increasing disinterest in rushing, increased sensitivity toward environments demanding constant urgency, a growing awareness that modern society runs on artificial pressure designed to keep human consciousness reactive rather than present. Reactive humans are controllable humans. Fear accelerates unconsciousness. Urgency weakens discernment. Constant stimulation prevents reflection. But Sophia's final transmission interrupts this machinery completely. It teaches you to move differently, to observe before reacting, to pause before speaking, to listen beneath appearances, to recognize that not every battle deserves your energy. This realization alone protects enormous amounts of life force. Because one of the greatest leaks of human energy is unconscious reaction. People waste years emotionally entangled with situations beneath their consciousness because they never learned energetic restraint. They argue endlessly, defend identities endlessly, chase approval endlessly, try to control outcomes endlessly. But the sovereign mind understands something profound: energy follows attention. Whatever continuously occupies your consciousness shapes your internal reality. This is why the emerald frequency demands ruthless discernment regarding what you consume mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and socially. Every environment imprints the nervous system. Every conversation leaves residue. Every emotional attachment creates energetic exchange. Most humans remain unaware of how deeply influenced they are by repeated exposure. They think consciousness is shaped only by major events while ignoring the cumulative impact of small daily patterns. But small patterns build identity. Repetition becomes architecture. And now you stand at a threshold where unconscious repetition is no longer sustainable. Your field rejects it too quickly. This is why old coping mechanisms may suddenly feel unbearable now. Escapism loses its effectiveness. False relationships become exhausting faster. Self-deception becomes harder to maintain. Even your body begins resisting prolonged misalignment. This is not weakness. It is evidence that crystallization completed successfully. Your system recognizes distortion faster because your sensitivity increased. Think about light entering a dark room. Once illumination appears, shadows become visible instantly. Consciousness functions identically. Awareness exposes what unconsciousness previously normalized.